Hello and welcome to this quick guide on the best Paragon board for Sorcerer, specifically for this very first gate slot we have access to at the top of our beginning board. Now this is the best choice from a mathematical perspective to max out our elemental damage, and will give you a 240% increase to all elemental damage by mid-60s, which when stacked with items will give you over 300% increase to the element of your build. This will be the optimal choice for almost any build or playstyle and will make the next board you choose much more powerful. And this discussion is a continuation of my previous video where we talked about the best glyph setup for this first slot to give you over 70% elemental damage. So be sure to check that out for setting up your starter board. To begin, it's important to understand that our highest priority stat on Sorcerer is this non-physical damage stat, which is essentially elemental damage and scales our damage with every skill in every school of magic. Magic damage scaling is always the highest priority for sorcerers, wizards, and mages in any type of game like this because the archetype thrives on deleting stuff before it has a chance to hurt you. The more damage you deal, the less likely anything is to threaten because it's already dead. Now this is especially true for the way that magic damage scales in Diablo 4, where the stats from the Paragon board multiply the stats on items, making non-physical damage an incredibly powerful stat to focus on. If you obtain 230% non-physical damage on your Paragon board, any item you equip with elemental specific damage, let's say cold damage, will also be increased by 230%. That means that any plus cold damage stat you have in your gear will be multiplied by 3.3. So if you had 39.1% total cold damage increase across 3 items like me, that would equal 129.1% effective cold damage increase in your stats on top of the 230% you already have from this Paragon board setup, enabling you to go well beyond 300% elemental damage for your build by mid-60s. Alright, so now that we understand why building non-physical damage is so important, let's take a look at the best selection for our first board on Sorcerer, which is going to be the 8th option, the Enchanter board. When you consider your Paragon boards, it's important not to just look at the legendary node, but also everything else the board has to offer, most importantly the rare nodes with their surrounding magic nodes, as well as the glyph slot placement. The reason the Enchanter board is so powerful for almost any build is because it has by far the most non-physical damage scaling available of any of the boards. We aren't even concerned with reaching the legendary glyph slot on this board. We're looking to pass through this bottom corner as efficiently as possible while picking up every damage scaling node and the glyph slot along the way. This is going to lead us to this second gate slot around level 70, where we can select the first board that aligns with our build and has the first legendary node we're after. Any board you choose at this second gate will be much more powerful than it would be at this first gate because you have a 240% elemental damage increase stacked underneath it. I also want to point out real quick that I have none of my Paragon points from Renown yet, and I'm definitely missing some Lilith statues as well, so with those 20 plus extra points you could be well into your third board by level 70. The Enchanter board is actually the only one that has pure non-physical damage scaling nodes besides the starting board. Every other board only has element or build specific nodes, with less damage nodes available in general. In addition, the amount of damage scaling you can obtain for the amount of points spent is way above any of the other choices because of how clumped these 3 damage nodes are. There is a total of 105% non-physical damage scaling available on this board, and because it's all grouped in this corner, it only takes 32 points to reach them as efficiently as possible. It will take 42 points to also obtain the glyph slot and move to the next gate. Conveniently, this second glyph slot is right along the way, and this is where you can start to utilize a glyph that is more specific to your element or build. I will say that if you're playing a build that utilizes a decent amount of crowd control, so any frost build or lightning stun or flame immobilize, then I think there's a clear choice for this second slot, just like the Enchanter glyph is for the first slot, and that's this control glyph. The problem is the control glyph isn't going to be very good until its second range because that's where most of the dex is for this socket. So what I'm doing is basically running a temporary glyph here that's good for my build while I level up my control glyph. Once it's 15, I'll place it here and grab the 4 extra dex nodes within the second range, which will give me 34 dex, which would be plus 18% damage to CC targets at level 1, so it will be much higher at level 15. And we'll also bring this additional bonus online, which synergizes very well with any frost build or lightning stun build. Whatever you choose, be sure to invest the few points required to optimize the glyph like we're discussing here. Last thing I'll mention on this board is that you don't need to worry about intentionally trying to hit these requirement bonuses for these rare nodes. They will slowly come online as you continue to level up and move across your Paragon board because you acquire these stats along the way. Oh, and you also get this nice 16% bonus damage to elites up here as well. In summary, the way I like to think about this is that if there was a board with a legendary node that gave you a 105% non-physical damage increase, that would be the meta and what everyone was building toward first. This is basically creating a 105% legendary node ourselves and accessing it along with a glyph slot for 42 points before moving to our first element specific or build specific board at this second gate. And just as a preview of what I'm doing at this second gate with the Chain Shatter build I'm running right now is grabbing the Icefall board and rotating it like this. First, moving up to this Cryomancy node, which will give me 35% increase to cold damage, then hitting the Icefall legendary node, then moving down toward this next damage node, but grabbing Keeper of Winter along the way. And the sick thing about this Polar Rime node is that its secondary stat is non-physical damage. So on top of the extra 52.5% damage to chilled enemies, we're getting another 20% non-physical damage scaling. Then moving over to this other chilled node called Frost right next to it, where we get another 52.5% damage to chilled enemies with some extra int. And then finally moving up to this glyph socket where I can slot my first Frost glyph, which will likely end up being this Frostbite one to really stack on the chill damage increase. With 10 willpower nodes around this socket totaling 54 will, Frostbite will be adding 30% increased damage to chilled enemies at level 1, so much more at level 15 with all these nodes. Once I complete this path, I will have 260% non-physical damage increase stacked with a 35% cold damage increase on my Paragon board. That means any gear I obtain that has plus cold damage will be increased by almost 300%, meaning it gets multiplied by 4. So if I was able to obtain plus 50% extra cold damage on my gear, which is very possible, that would give me a 200% effective increase in cold damage, which would put me just under 500% effective cold damage total when stacked with the 295% increase to cold damage I already have. With the right gear, it will be very possible to go well above 500% cold damage with this setup. And that doesn't include this additional 150% damage to chilled enemies that we will be stacking on top of it, along with additional multipliers from crowd control, stun, frozen, vulnerable, and any other modifiers obtained on gear or in the skill tree. Basically, it's going to be pretty fucking good. And that's it for this one. I hope you found it valuable. Be sure to stay tuned for more in-depth analysis like this, as well as full build guides as I progress into endgame, the first of which will likely be this Chain Shatter build I was just referencing. With that, take care, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.